So every week I listen to Webster Tarpley's podcast, World Crisis Radio, that he broadcasts from Washington, D.C. And, I like to listen to what the liberal statists are saying, how they view the world. He's one of the smarter ones, and he's one of the more grassroots that I believe is genuine. So, I don't agree with his worldview, but I just like to hear his take. And I also do agree in many times when he talks about geopolitical events. His views on Syria, Ukraine, these are areas where I actually do see eye to eye. I am a libertarian, a fan of Austrian economics, so obviously he wouldn't like me very much. But, I would like to hear any of his fans sort of defend my initial concerns with his Tarpley for Fed head proposals. One thing that does bother me about him isn't just, that we disagree on a lot of things, but everyone who has a provocative or strong worldview, there are always initial concerns that come up with proposals, right? It doesn't. This is true for me. This is true for him. This is true for everybody. And I think it's very important to make an effort to address those, right? So, if I were to make a video about, how I believe that we should do away with the welfare warfare state, there's obviously some initial concerns that statists would have about that, and it would be important for me to touch on those, even without even without waiting for somebody to bring them up. Well, because I disagree with the concerns, and I think that they can be alleviated and so on. This is not something Webster does. So, his view, if you're not familiar with it, for those who aren't as familiar with it, it's to nationalize the Federal Reserve, to basically take it away from the banking cartel, and issue century bonds in the trillions at 0% interest rate, and have it mainly be directed towards infrastructure, but really, have it be very open-ended and go towards a lot of areas that he, I guess, deems to be appropriate, right? So I'm sure it could go towards any area of the economy that he thinks is beneficial. Probably everywhere except for lawyers and, financial analysts. And, I get it, right? These are what he sees as the engine of economic growth, and he wants to jack up that growth by pumping credit in there. But a very obvious criticism that I think should be addressed there is the enormous amount of inflation that could potentially, or I'd say definitely would, come from this kind of policy, right? Because when you're issuing credit like that, that's the same as printing money. It's not any different, right? Okay, so it has to be repaid in 100 years. It has nothing to do with prices now, though. Right? Prices today are still going to rise from that type of hypothetical solution. And it's very important for him to either explain why he thinks that wouldn't happen, or why he doesn't think that's a problem. Right, so I think that pumping trillions into the economy as new money would cause an immediate problem, right? Because one thing that's very important for people to realize is that when you pump new artificial credit into an economy, you don't have this even, equal inflation that blankets over the whole economy all at once. It's very lumpy and it's uneven, and it creates asset bubbles in some areas where when the money doesn't go somewhere else, it may not have much of an impact on prices in other areas, right? So we're on like QE5 at this point with the Fed. And, they've pumped all this new money into the markets, but where have the bubbles been? The bubbles have been in financial assets, right? The bubbles have been in stocks, the bubbles have been in bonds, the bubbles have been in housing, right? And then you also have a student loan bubble, which the federal government has been involved with for a very long time now. So you don't have, pumping endless credit into student loans is going to pump up the price of tuition far more than the price of other areas. It could have an impact on prices in other areas, especially given time, just because that money does bleed into other sectors of the economy. But the initial largest effect that student loan credit has is making tuition more expensive, right? You understand that, right? That's very important, very basic. And when people say, "Oh, where's your inflation after all this QE?" Well, you can just point to a stock market bubble and a bond market bubble and point that's where it is, right? So there's also some other areas, like when you increase housing prices, you cause rent to skyrocket. But so issuing credit increases the money supply and increases prices. So Tarpley's plan is a much larger, it has the money hit a much larger target, and it has it not necessarily go straight to banks. One thing I don't think he understands is that when there is inflation, the rich and the more financially sophisticated class are the ones who benefit the most, or at least weather the storm the most effectively, right? The most financially savvy people are going to do the best in this environment because they can protect themselves from the price increases, and the sophisticated can identify, where they can actually profit when they put their money somewhere, right? The poor, who are spending all their money on rent and food, are not going to do very well in that type of environment. So if you're going to do this Tarpley for Fed head credit injection, you're going to have the poor get hurt the most. So those are my initial concerns right now. Obviously, I think that using central banking and price manipulation legal tender laws is extraordinarily violent and immoral, and that's another issue altogether. But just from a effectiveness standpoint, right? How useful is his position in achieving the goals he wants? These are some of my initial concerns, and some of them seem pretty obvious, right? Credit injection, inflation. I mean, that seems like a pretty big issue, and I've been waiting for him to address that. And I would love to hear some of you who are fans of his explain to me why I'm concerned about something I shouldn't be concerned about.